The garlic I pulled from the ground last summer had heads the size of my fist. Not exaggerating. Cloves so fat they barely fit in my palm, and the flavor. I will get to the flavor. But standing there, dirt under my nails, the sun hot on the back of my neck, pulling up one perfect bulb after another, all I could think was, I almost planted these the normal way. And if I had, I would have gotten exactly what I always got. Small heads, tight skins, cloves that were more effort to peel than they were worth. The kind of garlic that makes you shrug and say, well, at least I grew something. The difference between those two harvests was a single piece of advice from a woman who has been growing garlic for 40 years. She told me something that completely rewired how I think about this plant. And I have not planted garlic the old way since. The reason most home gardeners have never heard this method is honestly kind of annoying. It costs nothing. It requires no special tools, no fancy amendments, no imported seed stock. And it produces results so dramatic that if more people knew about it, the garlic you buy at the grocery store would be half the size, because no one would settle for those puny bulbs anymore. There is no product to sell you here. No garlic planting gizmo with a comfortable ergonomic handle. No $14 bag of specialty organic fertilizer in a matte finish bag. No subscription to a garlic growing app that sends you push notifications about when to water. Just a simple shift in timing and technique that, once you see it, makes you wonder why everyone does not do it this way. I think the answer is that industrial agriculture cannot easily replicate it at scale, so it never made its way into the standard gardening books. But we are not farming 1,000 acres of flat land with tractor implements. We have a raised bed, maybe a few rows in the backyard, a community garden plot with soil we have been building for years. And that means we can do things the big growers cannot. We can pay attention to individual plants. We can adjust our mulch depth by the handful instead of by the ton. We can work with the plant instead of working against it. I know exactly what you might be thinking right now. Garlic is garlic. You stick a clove in the ground in the fall, you mulch it, you wait, and you harvest in the summer. How complicated can it be? It is the easiest crop in the garden. It is the one you plant and forget about. I thought the same thing. I have been gardening for a good 15 years, and for the first 10 of those, I planted garlic exactly the way every YouTube video and garden blog and seed catalog instruction sheet tells you to. Pointy side up 2 inches deep, 6 inches apart, mulch heavily, walk away. And I got garlic. I absolutely got garlic. I was not failing. But it was fine. It was grocery store garlic, essentially. The kind you could buy for 50 cents a head at the supermarket. Nothing I would ever brag about. Nothing that would make you stop in someone else's garden and say, what on earth did you do to those? Nothing that would make you feel that little surge of pride when you handed a head to a friend and watched their eyes go wide. And then I met Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen lives 3 blocks over, in a house with a front yard that is almost entirely edible. The lawn is long gone, replaced by raised beds and fruit trees and herbs spilling over the edges of concrete blocks. Her garden is the kind of garden that makes you slow down when you walk past it. Not because it is fancy or immaculate. It is actually a little chaotic, plants tucked into every corner, trellises made from old bed frames and salvaged electrical conduit, 5-gallon buckets with tomatoes growing out of them, a fig tree and a half barrel that somehow produces more fruit than any fig tree has a right to. It is not a magazine garden. It is a real garden, the kind where the gardener is clearly more interested in what works than in what looks tidy. But everything in that garden is huge. The tomatoes look like they are on steroids, thick vines loaded with fruit that hang in heavy clusters. The peppers are so heavy they snap their own branches if she does not stake them in time. The kale leaves are the size of dinner plates. And the garlic. The first time I saw her garlic harvest laid out on her driveway to cure, I thought she had bought it from a farm stand. I literally stopped on the sidewalk and stared. The heads were enormous. White and purple streaked, perfectly formed, the kind of garlic you see in Italian market photos, the kind that looks almost too perfect to be real. I asked her what variety she grew, certain she had some rare heirloom strain I had never heard of, something passed down through her family from a village in China that no seed catalog had ever gotten its hands on. She laughed. Grocery store garlic, she said. The same stuff you buy in the produce section, the ordinary white softneck garlic that comes in a mesh bag. I have been replanting the same line for decades. It is not the varieties. It is how you plant it. That was the moment my garlic education actually began. She did not give me a list of products. She did not tell me to buy anything. She did not hand me a printout of a complicated fertilization schedule. She just explained something so obvious that I felt foolish for never having thought of it myself. And I am going to share it with you exactly the way she shared it with me, because once you hear it, you will never plant garlic the same way again. Let me back up for a moment though and talk about what goes wrong with the standard method. Because if you have ever been disappointed by your garlic harvest, if you have ever dug up a bulb in July and felt that little drop in your stomach when you saw how small it was, I want you to know you are not alone, and it is not your fault. The advice we have all been given is not wrong exactly. It is just incomplete. It treats garlic like a set it and forget it crop, which it almost is, but that framing misses a critical window, a moment when the plant is making decisions about its future that will determine the size of your harvest months later. The standard advice says plant in October, dig a hole 2 inches deep, drop the clove in, cover it with soil, mulch, and wait. And what happens? The clove sits in cold, often wet soil for months. If you live somewhere with heavy clay, like I do, that clove is basically marinating in chilly mud. The soil in winter does not dry out. It stays damp, sometimes saturated, for weeks on end. Some of the cloves rot before they ever sprout. They just turn to a soft, foul-smelling mush that you do not discover until spring when you go looking for the green shoot that never appeared. The ones that survive push up a little green shoot in early spring, and you feel a surge of hope, that moment of yes, it worked, and then they just kind of sit there, growing slowly, never really taking off. By June, you have a plant that looks okay, a few green leaves, a stalk that is maybe the thickness of a pencil. But when you dig it up, the bulb is small. Maybe it did not even divide into cloves properly. You get what looks like a slightly overgrown scallion bulb, one round oniony thing instead of a proper head with separate cloves. It is edible. It is garlic. You can chop it up and cook with it and it will taste fine. But it is not what you were hoping for when you planted it 8 months ago. And so the advice online tries to fix this with workarounds. Some people say fertilize more heavily. So you dump blood meal and bone meal into the planting hole, and maybe you get a slightly bigger bulb. But now you have also attracted every raccoon and neighborhood dog and stray cat to dig up your bed because it smells like a slaughterhouse. I did this exactly once. I came out the next morning to find my garlic bed looking like a crime scene, holes dug everywhere, cloves scattered across the lawn, a very satisfied-looking raccoon waddling away into the hedge. Others say water more consistently. So you are out there with a hose in April trying to keep the soil perfectly moist, and you end up with fungal issues on the leaves, orange rust spots spreading across the green, the plant slowly yellowing and collapsing. Still others say you need to buy seed garlic from a specialty supplier, which costs 3 times as much as grocery store garlic and in my experience performs about 10% better. Not nothing. A 10% improvement is real. But it is not the transformation you were promised for your money. It is not the difference between a golf ball and a softball. It is the difference between a golf ball and a slightly larger golf ball. There is another approach you will see if you dig deep enough into gardening forums, the kind where people have long arguments about soil microbiology and lunar planting calendars. Some folks swear by planting garlic in the spring instead of the fall. And I tried that too for 2 years because I was desperate to solve the rot problem. The idea is that you avoid the winter wet entirely. You store your cloves in the fridge for a few weeks to simulate winter, a process called artificial vernalization, then plant them in March as soon as the ground is workable. And you know what I got. Small bulbs, even smaller than the fall-planted ones. Because garlic needs a real cold period to trigger bulb division, and a few weeks in the crisper drawer is a pale imitation of 3 months in the actual ground, with all the freeze-thaw cycles and temperature fluctuations that come with it. The plants knew the difference, even if I did not want to admit it. They could tell they had been cheated out of winter, and they responded by refusing to form proper heads. So we are stuck right. Plant in fall and risk rot and stunted growth. Plant in spring and get tiny bulbs. Fertilize and attract pests. Do not fertilize and get mediocre results. It feels like a problem with no solution, one of those frustrating gardening puzzles where every answer just leads to a different problem. And honestly, that is where I was about 5 years ago. Ready to accept that my garlic would always be just okay. Ready to believe that the giant bulbs at the farmer's market came from some secret agricultural magic I would never possess. Some combination of perfect soil and perfect climate and generations of expertise that I simply did not have access to. And then Mrs. Chen changed everything. Here is what she told me. And I want you to listen closely, because the words she used were so simple that I almost missed the weight of them. She said garlic does not want to be buried. It wants to be tucked in. I asked her what that meant. She took me over to one of her beds, which was empty at the time, late summer, the soil dark and loose and smelling of compost. She knelt down and she showed me. Instead of digging a hole, she simply pressed each clove into the surface of the soil, just deep enough that it stood upright on its own, with the very tip of the clove still visible above the soil line. The flat bottom of the clove was in contact with the dirt, but barely. The pointy top was sticking out into the open air. Then she pulled a handful of loose straw over it, not packed down, not tamped, just fluffed on top like a blanket. She did not even pat it. Just let it sit there light and airy. That was it. No trench. No 6-inch deep hole. No tamping. The clove was barely underground. I will be honest with you. I thought she was messing with me. I stood there looking at this clove sitting practically on top of the soil with a few wisps of straw over it, and I thought, this is a joke. That clove is going to freeze solid, I said. It is going to heave right out of the ground in the first frost. The first hard rain is going to wash the straw away and leave it sitting there naked. It is going to dry out and shrivel up before it ever has a chance to root. She just smiled and said, try it with half your bed. Do your normal way on one side and my way on the other. See what happens. She did not argue with me. She did not try to convince me. She just told me to run the experiment. So I did. That fall I planted 30 cloves the standard way, pointy side up, 2 inches deep, in neat little holes I made with a dibber. I covered them with soil and patted it down and mulched them with straw the way I always had. And right next to them, in the same bed, same soil, same sun exposure, same everything, I planted 30 cloves the misses. Chen Wei, pressed into the surface, tip exposed, covered with a loose 3-inch layer of straw. I labeled the 2 sections with little stakes so I would not forget which was which. And then I waited. By late February, I noticed the first difference. The shallow planted garlic had sprouted earlier. Not by a lot, maybe a week and a half, but earlier. The shoots were thicker too. A deeper, more vibrant green, the color of healthy grass in May. They looked robust. The deep planted cloves came up later, thinner, paler, and a few of them never came up at all. When I dug down to check, I found exactly what Mrs. Chen had implied. They had rotted. The deep holes had collected water all winter, and the cloves had simply turned to mush. They were gone. All that careful planting, all that following of the standard advice, and those cloves had just dissolved in the ground. By April, the difference was undeniable. The shallow planted garlic was twice the height of the deep planted garlic. The stalks were as thick as my pinky finger, sturdy and upright. The leaves were broad and healthy, spreading out like fans. The deep planted garlic looked fine. It looked like garlic always looks in my garden. But fine suddenly was not good enough anymore because I had a direct comparison. 2 groups of plants growing side by side in identical conditions, and the shallow planted side looked like a different crop entirely. It looked like garlic that meant business. Harvest day in July was when I became a true believer. I remember the exact moment. I had been putting off the harvest for a few days, waiting for the lower leaves to brown off, and finally I went out with my garden fork and a basket. I started with the deep planted side because that was my normal method, my control group. The deep planted garlic produced heads that were, well, normal. 1.5 inches across, maybe 2 inches on the best ones. Perfectly usable. The kind of garlic you would not be embarrassed to show someone. The kind I had been growing for a decade. I set them in the basket and moved to the shallow planted side. And when I pushed the fork into the soil and lifted the first plant, I actually laughed out loud. The head was enormous. I am not exaggerating. I measured one later that day at just over 3.5 inches across. It barely fit in my palms. The cloves were so large that I only needed 2 or 3 for a recipe that normally called for 6. And the skins were easier to peel. They came away from the clove in one clean piece, instead of sticking and tearing the way they usually do. The flavor was more concentrated, sharper, more present. Everything about it was better. So what is going on here? Why does planting garlic almost on the surface, with just a loose mulch blanket, produce such dramatically better results than burying it deep? The answer, as Mrs. Chen explained it to me, is actually 3 things working together. And each one makes so much sense that you will wonder why this is not the standard advice in every gardening book ever printed. The first factor is rot prevention. Garlic is a bulb, and like any bulb, its worst enemy is sitting in wet soil for months. When you bury a clove 2 or 3 inches deep, especially in heavy soil, you are putting it in a place where water collects and lingers. Even if your soil drains well, that depth is going to stay damp all winter. The clove is trying to stay dormant, but it is also fighting off fungal pathogens the entire time. Every spore in the soil is looking for a nice, wet, decaying piece of organic matter to colonize, and a buried garlic clove is exactly that. Some cloves win that fight. Many do not. By planting the clove right at the surface, you put it in the zone where air circulation and evaporation happen fastest. The soil surface dries out between rains. The clove stays moist enough to stay alive, but not so wet that it rots. The straw mulch on top moderates the temperature and keeps the drying winter winds from desiccating it, but it does not trap water the way a deep hole does. It breathes. The second factor is temperature signaling. Garlic needs a cold period to trigger the biochemical process that tells it to divide into multiple cloves instead of remaining a single round bulb. This process is called vernalization, and it requires the clove to experience temperatures below about 40 degrees Fahrenheit for a period of several weeks. When you bury a clove deep, the soil insulates it. It still gets cold, but it gets cold more slowly and less intensely than a clove sitting near the surface. The surface clove experiences the full bite of winter. Every freeze-thaw cycle, every cold snap, every frosty morning. It feels the temperature swing from a sunny 40-degree afternoon to a bitter 15-degree night. And that intense, direct cold exposure is exactly what tells the garlic, hey, winter is really happening. This is not a drill. When spring comes, you need to divide and make a full head of cloves. The deep clove gets a weaker signal. It is like the difference between someone shouting instructions at you from across a room versus someone mumbling them from another room with the door closed. Both get the message across, but one produces a much stronger response. The surface clove gets the shout. The third factor is spring vigor. A clove planted at the surface, with its tip exposed, is positioned to take advantage of the very first warm days of late winter. The sun hits that dark soil surface, warms it up, and the clove, which is right there at the warmest part of the soil profile, wakes up fast. It sends up a shoot immediately, and that shoot has almost no soil to push through before it hits daylight. It does not have to fight its way up through a dense layer of earth, expending precious stored energy on tunneling. A deep planted clove has to push a shoot up through 2 or 3 inches of soil before it ever sees the sun. That is energy that could have gone into root development or leaf growth, wasted on what is essentially an underground obstacle course. The surface clove puts that energy into leaves instead. More leaves means more photosynthesis. More photosynthesis means more sugar stored in the bulb. More sugar means a bigger head of garlic at harvest time. It is a cascade that starts with that first easy emergence. That first day, the shoot breaks into the light without having to work for it. When you put these 3 factors together, you get a method that costs nothing, takes less effort than the standard way, and produces garlic that will make your neighbors stop and stare. And yet, almost no one teaches it. I have my theories about why, and they are honestly kind of annoying. Gardening advice, especially the kind that makes it into books and mainstream YouTube channels, tends to be optimized for reliability at scale, not for maximum results in a home garden. The deep planting method is reliable. It works in sandy soil, in clay soil, in wet falls and dry falls. It produces an acceptable harvest almost everywhere. The shallow method requires a little more attention to mulch depth depending on your climate. If you live somewhere with brutally cold winters and no snow cover, you might need a thicker mulch layer, maybe 5 inches of straw instead of 3. If you live somewhere with warm, wet winters, you might need a thinner one, maybe just an inch, to avoid creating a slug hotel. It is not one size fits all, and one size fits all is what mass market advice demands. So we get the deep planting method and we get small garlic, and we think that is just how it is. I do not want that for you. I want you to experience the same absolute delight I felt when I pulled up those first monster heads. So let me give you the exact method with all the specifics, so you can do this yourself this fall. First, the garlic. You can use grocery store garlic. I have done it. Mrs. Chen has been doing it for 40 years. There is a persistent myth that grocery store garlic is treated with a sprouting inhibitor and will not grow. Hand on heart, I have never once had grocery store garlic fail to sprout. I am sure some suppliers treat their garlic, and maybe there is a warehouse somewhere spraying their bulbs with something. But I have bought garlic from big chain supermarkets, from discount grocery stores, from Asian markets where the garlic still has dirt on it, and every single one grew. If you want to be absolutely certain, buy organic garlic, which is not treated with anything. But honestly, just buy the biggest, healthiest looking head of garlic you can find. Look for heads with large cloves. The bigger the clove you plant, the bigger the head you will harvest. That is just a fact of garlic biology. The clove is the food source for the emerging plant, the packed lunch it carries with it into the world, and a bigger pantry means a bigger plant. Do not plant the little runty cloves from the center of the head and expect them to produce giants. They will not. Take your head of garlic and break it apart into individual cloves. Do this gently. Do not peel them. The papery skin is a protective layer, and you want it intact. It is the clove's immune system, its barrier against the fungi and bacteria in the soil. Sort through your cloves and set aside any that are small, shriveled, or damaged. Only plant the biggest, firmest cloves. If you have a clove that is much smaller than the others, toss it in your cooking pile. It will grow, but it will produce a small head, and it is not worth the garden space. Save your best real estate for your best seed. Now timing. You want to plant about 4 to 6 weeks before your ground freezes solid. For most of the northern half of the United States, that means October. If you are in the south or the coastal west, you might be looking at November or even December. The goal is to get the clove in the ground early enough that it can grow some roots before winter dormancy, but not so early that it sends up a significant amount of top growth that will get killed by frost. A little green shoot poking up is fine. It will survive. A 6-inch tall plant going into December is going to have a rough time. It will get frost burned, and then it will have to regrow from scratch in the spring, which defeats the purpose of fall planting. Prepare your beds. Garlic likes loose, well-drained soil with plenty of organic matter. If you have heavy clay, work in some compost. You do not need to go crazy. A couple inches of compost worked into the top 6 inches of soil is plenty. Garlic is not a heavy feeder compared to something like tomatoes or corn. What it really wants is good drainage. If your soil stays soggy in the winter, consider building a slightly raised bed, even just a mound 6 inches high, to keep the cloves out of the waterlogged zone. The goal is to create a place where water moves through, not a place where water sits. Now here is the part that is going to feel wrong. Take a clove and press it into the soil pointy side up until it is just stable. The bottom of the clove, the flat basal plate where the roots will emerge, should be in contact with the soil. The tip of the clove should still be visible above the soil surface. You are not digging a hole. You are not using a trowel. You are just pressing it in with your fingers, the same way you might press a thumbtack into a cork board. If your soil is loose, this is easy. If your soil is compacted, loosen it first with a fork. The clove should feel secure, not wobbly, but it should not be buried. It should look like it is sitting on top of the ground, not in it. Space your cloves about 6 inches apart in all directions. If you are planting in rows, space the rows about 8 inches apart. Garlic needs room to grow those big leaves, and crowding it will reduce your bulb size. Give each clove its own little territory. Think of it like seating at a dinner party. You do not want everyone elbowing each other. Once all your cloves are in place, cover the entire bed with a loose layer of straw. Not hay. Hay has seeds, and you will spend the next spring pulling grass out of your garlic bed, cursing yourself for trying to save $3 on mulch. Straw is just the stems of grain plants, and it is seed-free. You want about 3 inches of straw, fluffed up, not packed down. Think of it as a duvet, not a weighted blanket. You should be able to see air pockets in it. The straw serves several purposes. It insulates the soil, keeping the temperature more stable. It prevents the soil surface from drying out completely in winter winds. It suppresses weeds in the spring. And it keeps the cloves in place if you get heavy rain before they have rooted in. If you live in a very cold climate, zone 4 or colder, you might want to go a little thicker on the straw, maybe 4 or 5 inches. If you live in a warm climate, zone 8 or warmer, you can go thinner, maybe an inch or 2. The goal is to keep the cloves from experiencing extreme temperature swings, not to keep them warm. Garlic needs cold. It just does not need to be freeze-dried. That is the whole planting process. No fertilizer, no bone meals, no special tools. You can plant 50 cloves in 15 minutes. I timed myself last fall. 12 minutes for 40 cloves, including the time it took me to spread the straw. It is almost absurdly simple. Now let me talk about what happens next, because there are a few things you should know about the growing season. In the spring, when the weather starts to warm, you will see green shoots pushing up through the straw. Do not remove the straw. The shoots will find their way through, and the straw will continue to suppress weeds and retain moisture. If you get a late hard frost after the shoots are up, do not panic. Garlic is remarkably cold tolerant. The leaves might get a little frost nipped, the tips might go pale and papery, but the plant will recover. It has been through worse. As the weather warms in spring, your garlic will start growing rapidly. This is when it needs water. Not a lot, but consistently. An inch of water per week is a good target. If it rains, you are covered. If it is dry, give it a soak. The straw mulch will help keep the soil moist, so you may find you need to water less often than you expect. Stick your finger into the soil under the straw. If it feels dry an inch down, water. If it feels moist, leave it alone. Overwatering is worse than underwatering at this stage. Around late spring, you will notice some of your garlic plants sending up a curly, pigtailed stalk from the center of the leaves. This is called a scape, and it is the flower bud of hardneck garlic varieties. If you are growing softneck garlic, the kind typically found in grocery stores, you may not see scapes. But if you do see them, cut them off. Snip them right where they emerge from the leaves. This redirects the plant's energy from flower production back into bulb growth, and you get larger heads. Plus, the scapes themselves are delicious. Chop them up and sauté them in butter. They taste like mild, fresh garlic with a hint of asparagus. It is one of the great bonuses of growing your own. Do not be tempted to pull your garlic early. I know it is hard. You see those big green plants, and you start wondering what is happening underground. You get curious. You get impatient. You think maybe I will just dig up one just to check. Resist that urge. Garlic needs time to fully size up and then to cure in the ground. The signal to harvest is when the bottom leaves start to turn brown and dry. Not the top leaves. The bottom ones. When the bottom 3 or 4 leaves are brown and papery, and the top leaves are still partly green, it is time. This usually happens in mid to late summer, depending on your climate and when you planted. To harvest, do not just yank the garlic out of the ground by the leaves. The stalks can snap, and then you are digging around in the soil trying to find the head, and you will inevitably spear it with your trowel and ruin it. Use a garden fork or a trowel to loosen the soil around each plant, then lift it gently. Brush off the excess soil, but do not wash the bulbs. You want them to dry, not get wetter. Washing introduces moisture into the outer layers, which can lead to mold during curing. Now comes curing, which is just a fancy word for drying. Lay your garlic out in a single layer somewhere warm, dry, and out of direct sunlight. A garage, a covered porch, a spare room with good air circulation. Leave the leaves and roots attached. The plant will continue to pull energy from the leaves into the bulb for a week or two, and then the whole thing will dry down. After about 2 to 3 weeks, the leaves and roots will be completely brown and papery. At that point, you can trim the roots to about 1/4 inch, cut the leaves off about 1 inch above the bulb, and brush off any remaining dirt. Your garlic is now ready for storage. Store it somewhere cool and dark, but not the refrigerator. A basement, a pantry, a cupboard away from the stove. Properly cured garlic will keep for months. I have had heads last until the following spring, though honestly, they rarely last that long because I use them so fast. I want to circle back to something I mentioned at the beginning, because it is the thing that gets me every time when I think about this method. The flavor. The garlic I grew using Mrs. Chen's shallow planting method was not just bigger. It was more potent. The cloves were denser, oilier, more aromatic. When I crushed one under the side of my knife, it filled the kitchen with that sharp, almost spicy garlic scent that makes your mouth water instantly. Grocery store garlic, and even my own deep-planted garlic from previous years, never had that intensity. I think it comes down to the stress factor. A plant that has to fight a little, that experiences the full force of winter, and then the full force of spring, produces more of the compounds that give it flavor. It is the same reason stressed grapevines produce better wine. The struggle concentrates the essence of the thing. There is a larger lesson here, and it is one I keep bumping into the longer I garden. We have been taught that the way to succeed is to make things easy for our plants. Soft soil, deep planting, plenty of fertilizer, constant water. And sometimes that works. But sometimes what a plant really needs is to be challenged, to be put in a position where it has to reach for what it wants. The garlic clove sitting at the surface exposed to the cold has to decide to survive. And that decision, that biological imperative, produces a plant that is stronger, more resilient, and ultimately more generous. Mrs. Chen told me something else that day, something I have not forgotten. She said that her grandmother in China planted garlic exactly the same way. No deep holes, no heavy mulch, just tuck it into the soil and let the winter do its work. The method is not new. It is old. It is the way people planted garlic before gardening books and fertilizer companies told them to do it differently. And it worked for generations because it aligns with what the plant actually wants. I think about that a lot. How much knowledge we have lost or set aside because it did not fit into the modern, product-driven model of gardening. How many simple, free techniques are sitting in the memories of older gardeners, waiting to be shared with someone who asks the right question? I was lucky. I asked Mrs. Chen about her garlic, and she was generous enough to tell me. Now I am telling you. So here is what I want you to do. If you have ever been disappointed by your garlic harvest, or if you have never grown garlic at all because it seemed like too much work, try this method. Just try it. Plant a few cloves this fall, right at the surface, cover them with straw and see what happens. I am so confident it will work for you that I am not even going to hedge. It will work. It will produce the best garlic you have ever grown. And when you are standing in your garden next summer, holding a head of garlic the size of your fist, I want you to remember that the best advice does not always come from a book. Sometimes it comes from a neighbor who has been doing it the old way for 40 years. If this method changes your garlic game the way it changed mine, share this video with someone who gardens. Send it to the friend who is always complaining about their small bulbs, or the family member who thinks growing garlic is too much trouble. This knowledge should not be a secret. It should be the standard. And maybe, if enough of us start planting garlic the old way, the gardening books will finally catch up. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being someone who is willing to question the standard advice and try something different. That is what makes gardening such a deeply satisfying pursuit. There is always something new to learn, and very often, that new thing is actually very old. I will see you in the next one.